At first it looks absurd. Ping-pong eyes, red light, white noise, and a dare to read minds. But the room is built like a trap. Once the world goes flat, your own brain becomes the monster. The scientists do not ask for faith. They ask for stillness, for boredom sharpened into a weapon. A sender stares at a hidden image in another room. A receiver waits, blindfolded inside scarlet fog. If anything crosses the gap, it will arrive as a whisper, a fragment, a shape with no passport. That was the promise. Telepathy without crystal balls, evidence without incense, a miracle under lamps. And that is why the Ganzfeld experiments were so dangerous to science. They offered a clean fight. No seance table, no darkened parlor, just protocols, judges, transcripts, hit rates, and scrutiny. Subscribe to the channel, like and share this video. Thank you. Now let's get back to the experiment. If the mind could breach distance here, then textbooks were incomplete and skepticism had a new enemy. If it failed, the failure would still expose something unnerving, how easily perception edits reality. The word Ganzfeld came from Gestalt psychology and meant a total field, a world drained of edges. In the 1930s, psychologists noticed that uniform sensory fields could flood the mind with inner images. Stare into sameness long enough, and the brain starts to manufacture pattern, motion, and weather. Decades later, parapsychology seized that weakness in perception and turned it into a lab strategy. Researchers such as Charles Honerton, William Broad, and Adrian Parker refined the modern Ganzfeld. They suspected that noisy, ordinary perception might drown subtle signals, if such signals existed at all. So they tried the opposite of stimulation. They built a soft cage made from monotony and waiting. The receiver reclined in an isolated room, cut off from contrasts, interruptions, and distractions. Half ping-pong balls were taped over the eyes to turn vision into an unbroken reddish horizon. Headphones fed white or pink noise, a sea-like hiss that erased footsteps, doors, and human context. A red lamp washed the visual field until depth dissolved and the room stopped feeling like a room. Often, the session began with relaxation instructions to quiet muscle tension and internal chatter. The goal was simple and radical. Reduce external structure so internal imagery could rise to the top. In another room, the sender sat apart with a randomly chosen target image or short film clip. Sometimes it was an art print. Later, emotionally vivid video clips were favored for stronger impact. The sender stared at the target and tried to mentally broadcast it across the sensory silence. Meanwhile, the receiver spoke continuously, reporting every flash, texture, emotion, and mental accident. Not polished visions, raw fragments. A wheel, a splash, metallic blue, feathers, panic, warm sunlight. This stream mattered because telepathy, if real, was not expected to arrive as neat spoken language. It would come distorted by memory, fantasy, expectation, and the brain's hunger to finish patterns. So the transcript became a battlefield between signal and noise, meaning and projection, hit and miss. For the receiver, the first minutes could feel merely silly, then dull, then strangely intimate. Without contours to anchor sight, the eyes kept searching and finding almost nothing worth trusting. The white noise did not soothe everyone. For some, it pressed against the skull like weather. Time stretched, breath grew louder. Tiny body sensations became events large enough to narrate. Then the shift often came quietly. Faint colors pulsed. Drifting forms appeared. Inner scenes unfolded. Some reported geometric shapes. Others saw landscapes, faces, corridors, water, birds, or sudden motion. The mind, starved of structure, began throwing images onto the blank screen it could not tolerate. This was not necessarily psychosis, nor proof of psi, but a lawful response to sensory monotony. Modern research would later frame Ganzfeld as a non-pharmacological altered state of consciousness. Healthy participants under sensory homogenization could experience pseudo-hallucinatory phenomena. That alone made the paradigm valuable beyond telepathy because it opened a safe window into mind. But in the classic sessions, the question stayed sharper. Were these images only self-generated debris? Or was some fraction of them shaped by a distant target held in another person's attention? The receiver kept talking, often embarrassed by the banality of what surfaced from the red void.
I'm sorry, I don't think...
I get something circular. Maybe glass. Maybe snow. No, wait, it feels like a waterfall. Scientists listened without interruption, careful not to reward guesses or steer the narrative. That restraint mattered. Suggestion is cheap. A raised eyebrow can manufacture an entire miracle. After about 30 minutes, the sensory field ended, and the judgment phase quietly began. The receiver was shown several possible targets, often 4, including the true one and decoys. Then came the cruel simplicity of the design. Pick which target best matches the mentation report. With 4 choices, chance alone should produce a hit about 25% of the time. If scores rose reliably above that line, the experiments would demand explanation, however uncomfortable. Some receivers felt certain only after the session, when one target suddenly seemed to click. Others felt betrayed by memory, noticing how easily vague images could be stretched to fit anything. This ambiguity was the soul of the Ganzfeld drama. The protocol was simple. The mind was not. Honerton became the most visible champion of the method and pushed for stricter, cleaner procedures. Critics, especially psychologist Ray Hyman, attacked weaknesses in early studies with relentless detail. They argued that sensory leakage, loose analyses, selective reporting, and weak methods still lurked. The dispute became one of science's most revealing duels, not only over psi, but over rigor. That conflict forced parapsychologists to improve randomization, blinding, automation, and records. In one sense, the Ganzfeld was testing telepathy. In another, it was stress testing methodology. By the 1980s and 1990s, auto-Ganzfeld systems computerized parts of the procedure to reduce bias. Targets were selected more securely, judging was tightened, and experimenter influence was constrained. A famous review by Daryl Bem and Charles Honerton argued that higher quality studies still scored. They reported hit rates above chance in a set of tightly controlled auto-Ganzfeld experiments. Supporters saw a breakthrough. At last, a repeatable laboratory effect with disciplined safeguards. Skeptics saw the oldest danger in research: patterns amplified by bias, flexibility, and tiny leaks. The controversy never truly cooled. It became a long war of meta-analyses, replications, and doubt. Later reviews continued to report small positive effects, while critics questioned interpretation. That is why Ganzfeld survives in scientific memory, not as settled proof, but as a hard problem. It sits at the border where statistics, expectation, consciousness, and belief contaminate each other. For participants, however, the battle was not abstract. It was personal, bodily, and immediate. Many described the strange intimacy of narrating thoughts before they had fully become thoughts. The red field flattened the world, until imagination felt less like fantasy and more like arrival. A splash of color could seem externally given, then collapse into uncertainty an instant later. The receiver often moved between confidence and shame, revelation and self-suspicion. That oscillation is psychologically important. Human beings are pattern predators with fragile filters. When structure disappears, top-down expectation grows louder, trying to impose order on ambiguity. That lesson would echo far beyond parapsychology, into cognitive science and hallucination research. Recent neuroscience used multimodal Ganzfeld states to probe altered consciousness in healthy brains. Imaging work has linked the state to shifts in thalamocortical coupling and internal signal balance. In plain terms, the brain seems to lean away from external input and toward generated experience. This makes Ganzfeld a rare laboratory tool. It can induce unusual perception without drugs. Researchers interested in hallucinations, imagery, and predictive processing found that deeply useful. Experiments comparing Ganzfeld with Ganz flicker showed different mixes of simple and complex visuals. Simple forms often rose more with flicker, while Ganzfeld preserved a greater share of complex imagery. That suggested a dance between bottom-up stimulation and top-down construction in conscious experience. So even if telepathy remains disputed, the paradigm taught scientists how perception fills a vacuum. It showed that vision is never passive reception. It is active inference under pressure. The method also influenced the culture of controversial research in subtler but lasting ways. Because Ganzfeld results were contested, the field adopted stronger safeguards earlier than expected. Some parapsychology journals even tested pre-registration-like review before data collection. Years later, historians pointed to those practices as early prototypes of registered reports. In that ironic twist, research on the paranormal helped preview reforms for mainstream psychology. The experiment also shaped adjacent psi programs, though not always in the same exact form. Cold War remote viewing projects and other anomalous perception efforts shared that dream. They reused the logic of sender, receiver, judging, blinding, and statistical evaluation under control. The military and intelligence world cared less about metaphysics than about whether any edge existed. If a mind could extract remote information at all, someone wanted to measure or weaponize it. Yet the hardest truth stayed unchanged. Intriguing deviations are not operational certainty. Science is full of effects that shrink under pressure, vanish in new hands, or hide in noise. Ganzfeld forced that humility into the room every single time a participant said, "I think I see." It also exposed the experimenter effect. Some labs and some investigators seemed to get stronger results. Was that better rapport, unconscious cueing, statistical drift, or a real feature of the phenomenon? No answer satisfied everyone, but the question itself became scientifically fertile ground. It pushed psychology to confront how human relationships can shape data before numbers ever appear. The receiver was not a sensor. The sender was not a machine. The lab was a social organism. Belief, comfort, motivation, boredom, suggestibility, and trust all pressed on the final score. Some researchers noticed that meditators or people with prior anomalous experiences scored better. Others warned those traits might also predict richer imagery, confidence, or suggestibility. Again, the Ganzfeld split open into two readings: psi signal, or psychology performing its old tricks. That double reading is one reason the story still grips people decades after its debut. It is not merely about telepathy. It is about how fragile the border is between seeing and making. It is about the brain's refusal to endure emptiness without inventing a world to inhabit. And it is about science at its most honest and cruel, building a test for what it may hate. When the session ended, the receiver removed the halves and blinked back into ordinary geometry. The room regained edges, the noise stopped. The body returned as if surfacing from deep water. Then came scoring, discussion, and the hard conversion of lived weirdness into a single binary outcome. Hit or miss, above chance or not. Wonder was translated into percentages and p-values. That compression is brutal. Yet it is why the Ganzfeld mattered. It tried to quantify the uncanny. Many controversies die because methods stay vague. Ganzfeld endured because the method was concrete. You could inspect the rooms, the targets, the transcript, the judging rules, the randomization chain. You could argue fiercely, but you could not dismiss the effort as pure mysticism in costume. For humanity, that matters. We advance not only by being right, but by testing bold ideas hard. Some experiments prove a phenomenon. Others prove how easily we fool ourselves. The best teach both. Ganzfeld did exactly that. It challenged reductionism, embarrassed credulity, and educated skepticism. It reminded researchers that extraordinary claims demand hard controls and imaginative design. It widened the study of altered states by showing that monotony alone can reshape consciousness. It offered a humane model for probing hallucination-like experience without pathology or intoxication. It sharpened debates on replication, publication bias, blinding, and expectations fingerprints. In short, it helped science grow teeth where belief and ambiguity had long run loose. Did it prove telepathy? The honest answer is still contested, and that tension is part of its legacy. But it undeniably proved something about us. When the world falls silent, the mind does not. It surges forward, paints on darkness, grabs coincidence by the throat, and begs for meaning. That is why the Ganzfeld room feels larger than its walls. It contains a species-level confession. We do not merely perceive reality. We negotiate with it, predict it, haunt it from within. And every time a receiver in red light whispered a fragment from the void, science had to listen. Not because the answer was comfortable, but because the question was disciplined enough to matter. That is the real triumph of the Ganzfeld experiments. They turned an impossible rumor into a test. They forced mystery to sit under laboratory lamps and either survive measurement or die trying. Very few ideas are brave enough for that. Fewer still leave useful knowledge, whatever the verdict. Ganzfeld did. It left us better tools, deeper caution, richer models of perception, and better questions. And perhaps that is the final twist. Even if minds never spoke across distance, the experiment did. It made psychology talk to neuroscience, skepticism talk to imagination, and method talk to wonder. In the end, the red field was never empty. It was crowded with everything science fears and needs. Subscribe to the channel, like and share in the comments what you think about this experiment. Thank you, and see you in the next experiments.